It had been a perfectly ordinary Tuesday evening. I sat in my living room wearing comfortable pajamas, a mug of chamomile tea steaming on the coffee table beside me as I scrolled through a novel on my e-reader. The digital clock on my cable box showed 11:47 p.m. when the pounding began. Three sharp, authoritative blows against my front door that made me jolt upright, splashing hot tea onto my leg. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. My heart rate accelerated. I was not expecting visitors, especially not this close to midnight. Living alone in Oak Ridge Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood where most residents were asleep by 10, unexpected late-night visitors were cause for concern. I approached the door cautiously, flipping on the porch light and peering through the peephole. Two figures stood on my doorstep. They wore dark blue uniforms with badges that caught the porch light. My first thought was actual police, but something felt off about their appearance. The uniforms looked almost theatrical, too crisp, and adorned with unnecessary patches. I slid the security chain into place before opening the door a few inches. "Good evening," the taller man said, his voice betraying no awareness of the inappropriate hour. "Oak Ridge Estates HOA Security. We have received multiple noise complaints about a dog barking at this residence." I blinked, momentarily confused by the accusation. There must be some mistake. I do not have a dog. The shorter officer stepped forward, his face stern under the brim of a hat that mimicked police headwear but bore the HOA logo instead of an official badge. "Sir, we have documented complaints from 3 separate neighbors. The barking has been consistent for over an hour." "That is impossible," I replied, feeling a mixture of confusion and indignation rising in my chest. "I do not own any pets, never have." The taller officer pulled out a small notebook. "Section 8, Paragraph C of the Oak Ridge Estates Covenant clearly states that noise disturbances after 10 p.m. are subject to immediate inspection and potential fines of up to $500 per incident. We need to come inside and verify compliance." My confusion transformed into alarm. "You want to enter my home at midnight? Absolutely not." Their demeanor shifted immediately. The shorter man placed his hand against the door, not quite pushing but establishing physical presence. "Refusal to comply with HOA security inspections constitutes a violation of your homeowner agreement. We are authorized to conduct inspections at any time when violations are reported." I stood my ground, though my heart hammered in my chest. No law gives HOA security the right to enter a private residence without consent. If there is a legitimate noise complaint, you can send me written notice tomorrow. Good night. I attempted to close the door, but the officer pushed back against it. "Listen carefully. We can do this the easy way with a quick inspection now, or we can escalate this to the board with maximum penalties. Your choice." The confrontation had escalated from absurd to threatening in moments. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "My choice is that you leave my property immediately. Any communication can happen through official channels during business hours." The taller officer leaned closer to the gap in the door. "You are making a serious mistake. The board does not look kindly on uncooperative homeowners. Expect formal violation notices and fines by the end of the week." "Good night," I repeated firmly, closing the door despite their continued protests. I engaged both deadbolts, listening as they muttered between themselves on the porch before finally retreating. I returned to my living room, but the peaceful evening was irreparably shattered. My hands shook slightly as I picked up my phone, setting a reminder to research HOA regulations first thing in the morning. Something was deeply wrong about what had just transpired, and the threatening nature of the visit left me feeling vulnerable in my own home. Little did I know this midnight confrontation was merely the opening salvo in a calculated campaign against me. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as I sat at my table with a cup of coffee, laptop open to the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association website. After a restless night, I had risen early, determined to understand what had prompted the bizarre midnight visit. What I discovered over the next few hours transformed my understanding of the community I had called home for the past 14 months. Oak Ridge Estates appeared picturesque on the surface. Neat rows of houses with manicured lawns, colorful flower beds that adhered to approved planting guidelines, and mailboxes that matched precisely in style and height. The perfection I was learning came at a considerable cost to personal freedom. The HOA bylaws document stretched to 178 pages of rules, restrictions, and penalties. I scrolled through regulation after regulation. Trash cans could not be visible from the street except between 6 p.m. the night before collection and 8 p.m. the day of collection. Holiday decorations required approval forms and could not be displayed more than 14 days before or 7 days after the holiday. Even the shade of white permitted for window blinds was specified down to an exact color code. Taking my coffee to the window, I looked out at my neighborhood with new eyes. What I had interpreted as community pride now resembled something closer to enforced conformity. A neighbor across the street was meticulously measuring the height of his grass with a ruler. Another was hurriedly bringing in a welcome mat that likely violated the Approved Designs section of the rule book. I decided to take a walk. 4 doors down, I spotted Mrs. Chen tending to her garden. She had always been friendly during our brief encounters. "Good morning," I called, approaching her neat flower bed. "Beautiful day." She glanced around nervously before responding. "Yes, very nice. How are you settling in? It has been over a year now, yes." "Almost 14 months. Actually, I had a strange experience last night. HOA security came to my door at midnight about a barking dog. Thing is, I do not have a dog." Mrs. Chen's expression shifted subtly. She put down her gardening trowel and stepped closer, lowering her voice. "They came inside your house." "No, I refused, but they were very insistent." She nodded, seeming unsurprised. The Hernandez family on Oakwood Circle had similar visits before they moved, and the Thompsons before them, always complaints about violations that seemed manufactured. A chill ran down my spine despite the warm morning. Who exactly runs the HOA here? "Victoria Winters," Mrs. Chen replied, almost whispering the name. "HOA president for 8 years running. Elections happen, but somehow she always wins. Most people are too afraid to vote against her. The security team is her creation, former mall cops mostly, but she gives them uniforms that look almost like real police. They patrol constantly." Our conversation was interrupted by the slow cruise of an SUV with Oak Ridge Estates security emblazoned on its doors. The driver, not one of the men from last night, made a point of slowing down as he passed us, nodding something on a clipboard before driving on. "See what I mean?" Mrs. Chen sighed. "They watch everything. Last year my roses were 2 inches taller than regulation. $300 fine." Back home, I began researching HOA laws in our state. The more I read, the clearer it became that many of the powers our HOA claimed fell into legal gray areas at best, outright overreach at worst. Security personnel had no legal authority to enter homes without consent. Many of the fines appeared to exceed legal limits for HOA penalties. My phone rang just after noon. The caller ID showed Oak Ridge HOA office. "Hello," I answered, keeping my tone neutral. "This is Victoria Winters, Oak Ridge HOA president." Her voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable note of authority. "I understand there was some confusion regarding a compliance check at your property last night." "There was no confusion on my part," I replied evenly. "Your security team attempted to enter my home at midnight based on false claims about a pet I do not own. Our officers were responding to multiple complaints. Refusal to cooperate with HOA security is a serious matter." I took a deep breath. "Ms. Winters, no HOA regulation supersedes state law regarding trespassing or right to privacy. Your security personnel have no legal authority to enter private property without consent." A brief silence followed. When she spoke again, her voice had cooled considerably. "I would hate to see a new homeowner accumulate violations so quickly. It makes maintaining property values difficult." The implied threat was clear. After ending the call, I sat quietly, weighing my options. I could capitulate to their intimidation or stand my ground against what was increasingly appearing to be systematic abuse of power. The easier path would be to apologize, allow their inspections, and avoid becoming a target. The right path, however, was becoming equally clear. I opened my laptop and created a new folder titled HOA Documentation. The first file I saved was a summary of last night's incident and today's phone call. If they wanted a fight, I would be ready, with evidence. 3 days after the midnight visit, an official letter arrived from the Oak Ridge Estates HOA. The envelope bore the association logo, an oak tree silhouette that once seemed welcoming but now appeared somehow ominous. Inside was a formal violation notice printed on heavy cardstock with the association letterhead. "Notice of covenant violation," the heading declared in bold text. Below, in clinical language, it detailed my alleged infractions: unauthorized pet ownership and repeated noise disturbances between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. The notice ended with a demand for compliance within 72 hours and a warning that failure to address these violations would result in an initial fine of $250, increasing by $100 daily until resolved. I stared at the paper, momentarily bewildered by the absurdity of being fined for a non-existent dog. After my initial shock subsided, I composed a formal response. Using my best business writing, I firmly denied all allegations, requested documentation of the specific complaints including dates and times, and reminded the board that entering my property without consent would constitute trespassing under state law. I sent the letter via certified mail, requiring signature confirmation. The response was swift, but not in written form. The very next morning, an HOA security vehicle drove slowly past my house as I left for work. That evening, the same vehicle passed by 3 more times before parking across the street for nearly 30 minutes. The driver made no attempt to be subtle, openly photographing my property with a long-lens camera. This pattern continued for days. Each morning and evening, security vehicles would conduct what they likely considered patrols, but felt increasingly like surveillance. Occasionally, they would stop, photographing supposed violations: a garden hose not fully wound on its reel, a newspaper that remained in the driveway past noon, minor issues that had never warranted attention before. Most disturbing were the continued reports of dog barking. Neighbors I barely knew would approach me in the grocery store or gas station with uncomfortable expressions. "Maybe you could keep your dog inside at night," suggested Mr. Peterson from 2 streets over. "I do not have a dog," I replied for what felt like the dozenth time. Well, someone has been filing complaints, just trying to help. After 2 weeks of escalating harassment, I decided more proactive measures were necessary. I invested nearly $800 in a comprehensive security camera system, 4 exterior cameras covering all approaches to my home, plus a doorbell camera with audio recording capabilities. I spent an entire Saturday installing them, noticing that the HOA security vehicle drove by 3 times during the installation. The cameras proved their worth almost immediately. On the third night after installation, my phone alerted me to motion detected near my backyard fence. The timestamp showed 11:42 p.m. I opened the app to find live footage of a figure standing just beyond my property line. The streetlight illuminated enough of her face to be recognizable. Victoria Winters herself, the HOA president, phone in hand, pointed toward my house. I watched, bewildered, as she stood there for nearly 3 minutes before walking away. The next morning, a new complaint about excessive dog barking at 11:45 p.m. appeared in my mailbox. The connection was unmistakable. There was no dog, there never had been. The complaints were being manufactured. But why target me specifically? I had never confronted the board or violated any significant rules. My house was well maintained. I kept to myself. Nothing about my situation explained this focused campaign of harassment. The answer arrived unexpectedly in my mailbox 2 days later. A plain white envelope with no return address contained a single handwritten note on lined paper. "You are not crazy. They are targeting you. They want your house. Others before you have been forced to sell. Be careful who you trust." A neighbor. That evening, I meticulously reviewed property records for Oak Ridge Estates using the county's online database. A pattern emerged that sent chills down my spine. Over the past 5 years, 12 properties had been sold significantly below market value after the owners had lived there less than 2 years. In each case, the new buyer was a limited liability company, Winters Property Holdings, LLC. Victoria Winters was not just enforcing rules with excessive zeal. She was systematically forcing out new homeowners, creating conditions so intolerable they would sell at a loss just to escape. Then her company would purchase the devalued properties. This realization transformed my approach entirely. I was not facing over-enthusiastic rule enforcement or personal dislike. I was facing a calculated scheme for financial gain executed through systematic harassment. My refusal to allow the midnight inspection had likely marked me as someone who would not be easily intimidated, accelerating their timeline for forcing me out. That night, I reviewed all my security footage, downloaded property records, and organized my growing documentation of harassment. What had begun as bewilderment had evolved into determination. Victoria Winters had chosen the wrong homeowner to target. I would not be intimidated into selling my home. Instead, I would gather evidence, build a case, and ensure that justice was served, not just for me, but for everyone in Oak Ridge Estates who had suffered under this corrupt regime. The manila folder labeled HOA Incidents quickly grew too thin to contain my expanding documentation. I upgraded to a 3-ring binder, then eventually to a dedicated filing box. Each interaction with the HOA or its representatives was meticulously recorded, dated, and organized chronologically. Photographs of security vehicles parked outside my home were printed and labeled with dates and times. Security camera footage was downloaded and backed up to external hard drives. My dining room transformed into an investigation headquarters. A wall calendar tracked the pattern of complaints against me, now expanding beyond the fictional barking dog to include imaginary covenant violations like unapproved plant species. in gardens I had not planted, and improper window treatments on windows that had the exact blinds specified in the HOA guidelines. I purchased a call recording app for my phone after consulting state law to confirm single-party consent was legal in my jurisdiction. The first recorded call came just 3 days later, a board member named Richard Simmons calling to discuss ongoing compliance issues. "We just want to make sure you understand the seriousness of these violations," he said, his tone falsely sympathetic. "Some homeowners find that Oak Ridge Estates might not be the right fit for their lifestyle. There are neighborhoods with fewer restrictions." "Are you suggesting I should sell my home?" I asked directly. A pause. "I am merely pointing out that some people prefer living without the quality controls that maintain our property values. If that includes you, perhaps exploring other options would reduce your stress." "What would happen to my property if I decided to sell quickly?" His answer confirmed my suspicions. "The market can be unpredictable, but the HOA does work with investors who can often make cash offers for quick closings. I would be happy to introduce you to one." I bet you would, I thought, but thanked him politely and ended the call. Another piece of evidence documenting their scheme. My next step required professional guidance. I researched attorneys specializing in HOA disputes and property rights, eventually scheduling a consultation with Sarah Martinez, who had successfully handled several high-profile cases against predatory homeowners associations. "What you are describing goes beyond typical HOA overreach," she commented after reviewing my documentation. "The systematic targeting, manufactured violations, and connection to property acquisition could potentially constitute harassment, fraud, and even racketeering if we can prove coordination among board members for financial gain." "Do I have enough evidence to take legal action?" I asked. "You have a compelling start, but we need more direct evidence connecting the harassment to the property purchases. Keep documenting everything. If you can get statements from previous homeowners who experienced similar treatment, that would significantly strengthen the case." Following her advice, I began carefully reaching out to former Oak Ridge residents who had sold under suspicious circumstances. Many seemed reluctant to discuss their experiences, suggesting the intimidation continued even after they had moved away. However, 3 former homeowners agreed to provide written statements describing patterns of harassment identical to what I was experiencing. The real breakthrough came from James Woodward, who had moved out just 8 months earlier. "They did the same thing to me: false noise complaints, security patrols, escalating fines. I have audio recordings of Victoria Winters telling me directly that my problems would disappear if I sold to a recommended buyer. I was going through a divorce and could not handle the additional stress, so I took the offer, 20% below market value. I have regretted it every day since." His recordings provided the explicit connection we needed between the harassment campaign and the property acquisition scheme. Throughout this investigation, the HOA escalated their tactics. Violation notices arrived weekly. Fines accumulated, though I refused to pay them, formally contesting each one in writing. Security vehicles became such a constant presence that neighbors began asking if I was under some kind of official investigation. The most dramatic evidence came on a Tuesday evening in early autumn. My backyard camera activated at 10:47 p.m., capturing clear footage of Victoria Winters approaching my property line. She carried a small portable speaker. After looking around to ensure she was unobserved, she placed the speaker on the ground, pressed a button, and walked away. The distinct sound of a dog barking played from the device for approximately 15 minutes before she returned to retrieve it. I watched the footage in stunned disbelief before downloading multiple copies to ensure it was preserved. The smoking gun had arrived, irrefutable proof that the HOA president herself was manufacturing the very violations she was using to harass me. The next morning, I received notices from two neighbors complaining about incessant dog barking at approximately 11 p.m. Both complaints were forwarded to the HOA and added to my growing file of violations. That afternoon, I met again with Attorney Martinez, presenting my expanded evidence including the critical video of Victoria Winters with the speaker. "This changes everything," she said, reviewing the footage. "This is not just harassment anymore. This is fraud, plain and simple. We have enough to approach law enforcement." "Should we confront the HOA board directly first?" I asked. She shook her head firmly. "Absolutely not. Given what we know about their methods, tipping our hand could lead to evidence disappearing or witnesses being pressured. We need to build the strongest possible case before they realize the extent of our investigation." We developed a strategic plan, continue documenting incidents, gather additional witness statements, and prepare for potential legal action. I would maintain normal routines to avoid arousing suspicion while we built our case. "Be prepared," Attorney Martinez warned as our meeting concluded. "Once they realize their usual tactics are not driving you out, they may escalate further. Make sure your security systems are functioning, and do not hesitate to call the police if you feel threatened." Her warning proved prescient sooner than either of us expected. The HOA's next move would cross the line from harassment to something far more dangerous, and provide exactly the opportunity we needed to involve real law enforcement. Exactly 27 days after beginning my evidence collection, I was awakened by thunderous pounding on my front door. The digital clock on my nightstand displayed 12:17 a.m. My security system app had already sent multiple alerts to my phone, showing 4 uniformed figures on my front porch. The aggressive nature of their pounding made the doorbell camera vibrate with each impact. I slipped out of bed, heart hammering in my chest. This visit felt different from the first, more aggressive, more desperate. I grabbed my phone and activated the video recording function before approaching the door. Through the peephole, I could see 4 HOA security officers, including both men from the previous midnight visit plus 2 new faces. All wore the mock police uniforms, and one carried what appeared to be a clipboard with official-looking documents. "Security check. Open the door immediately," shouted the tallest officer, his fist continuing to hammer against the wood. I engaged the security chain before opening the door a few inches. "It is after midnight. What is the emergency?" The lead officer thrust a document toward the narrow opening. "Emergency inspection order signed by the entire board. Multiple violations reported today requiring immediate verification, including water leakage potentially affecting adjoining properties, unauthorized pet and noise disturbances. Open this door now." I held my phone visibly, making sure they could see it was recording. "I am not permitting entry to my home at midnight. Any legitimate concerns can be addressed during business hours through proper legal channels. All communication should go through my attorney, Sarah Martinez. I have her card if you need her contact information." The mention of an attorney visibly unsettled them, but the lead officer quickly recovered. "Legal representation does not override the emergency provisions in your homeowner agreement. Section 12 clearly permits immediate entry when property damage may be occurring. Open this door, or we will consider it a direct violation resulting in maximum daily fines and potential lien placement. There is no water leak or property damage. This is harassment, and I am recording this entire interaction as evidence. The second officer stepped forward, his face contorted with barely controlled anger. Listen carefully. We are authorized by the board to inspect this property now. Refusal will result in immediate penalties, including suspension of all community privileges and commencement of foreclose proceedings for covenant violations. That is not legally enforceable, and you know it, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. Please leave my property immediately. What happened next occurred with shocking speed. The lead officer nodded subtly to his colleagues, and suddenly all four men pushed against the door simultaneously. The security chain strained against the frame, the wood splintering around the screws. I stumbled backward as the chain gave way with a sharp crack, the door flying open and banging against the interior wall. "Stop, you are breaking into my home," I shouted, retreating down the hallway while continuing to record. "I am calling the police right now." The security team pushed into my foyer, one of them reaching toward me. "Hand over that phone. Recording HOA security personnel is prohibited under covenant rules." I turned and ran toward my bedroom, locking the door behind me as I dialed 911. My hands trembled so badly I had to try twice to hit the correct numbers. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher's calm voice contrasted sharply with the pounding that had now begun on my bedroom door. "Four men have broken into my home," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "They forced my front door open and are now trying to break into my bedroom. They claim to be HOA security but have no legal right to enter my home." "Are they armed?" the dispatcher asked. "Not that I saw, but they are wearing uniforms that look like police uniforms. They are from my homeowners association security team, but they have broken my door and are now trying to force entry to my bedroom." In the background, one of the men shouted through the door, "This is your final warning. Open this door or we will consider it obstruction of HOA regulations." I relayed this to the dispatcher, who assured me officers were already en route. "Stay on the line with me. Can you safely barricade yourself until police arrive?" I pushed my dresser against the door, the wooden legs scraping across the floor. "Yes, I am blocking the door. Please hurry." The minutes that followed seemed to stretch endlessly. The men continued pounding on the door, the wood visibly flexing with each impact. I could hear them arguing among themselves, their voices growing more uncertain as time passed. One seemed to be advocating for retreat, while another insisted they were within their rights. "Police are 3 minutes out," the dispatcher updated me. "They have been advised this is a home invasion in progress." Suddenly, a new voice joined the commotion outside my bedroom, deeper, more authoritative, belonging to none of the four who had broken in. "What the hell do you think you are doing, Richard? Have you completely lost your mind?" The pounding on my door stopped immediately. Through the ongoing 911 call, I relayed this development to the dispatcher. "Stay secured in your room until police arrive," she advised, "even if it sounds like they are leaving." 2 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed through my bedroom window, casting rhythmic patterns across the walls. The sound of multiple car doors slamming was followed by authoritative voices identifying themselves as police officers. I remained barricaded until a knock came at my bedroom door, followed by a professional voice. "Police department, are you okay in there, sir? Can you open the door?" Only after confirming through my window that actual police vehicles were indeed parked outside did I move the dresser and open the door. Two uniformed officers stood in my hallway, while beyond them I could see the HOA security team being questioned by additional officers in my living room. "Are you injured?" one officer asked me. "No, just shaken," I replied, still clutching my phone with the video recording of the entire incident. "Can you tell us exactly what happened here tonight?" Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I responded, "I can do better than that. I can show you. And not just from tonight, I can show you evidence of months of orchestrated harassment leading up to this break-in. What happened tonight was not random. It was the culmination of a systematic campaign to force me out of my home." The officer nodded, taking out his notepad. "Start from the beginning. We have all night." The tide had finally turned. What the HOA had intended as intimidation had instead provided the catalyst to bring their entire operation crashing down. The aftermath of the midnight break-in unfolded with a momentum that surprised even me. Two police officers remained at my home until nearly 4 a.m., meticulously photographing the splintered door frame, taking detailed statements, and reviewing security footage not just from that night, but from weeks of documented harassment. They departed with copies of my evidence files and assurances that this case would receive thorough investigation. By 10 a.m. the next morning, a detective called to schedule a formal interview. By noon, local news vans had somehow caught wind of the story and parked along my street, reporters approaching neighbors for comments about the overnight police activity. By 2 p.m., my attorney Sarah Martinez had arrived, bringing with her unexpected news. "The district attorney wants to meet with us tomorrow morning," she announced, barely containing her excitement. "This has escalated beyond a civil matter. They are considering criminal charges." The meeting at the district attorney's office the following day exceeded all expectations. Assistant District Attorney Thomas Garcia reviewed our evidence with increasing interest, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. When we reached the video of Victoria Winters planting the speaker to create fake dog barking sounds, he paused the playback. "This is textbook fraud," he commented. "Combined with the break-in, we are looking at a pattern of harassment, criminal trespassing, attempted breaking and entering, and potentially conspiracy charges if we can establish the board members were coordinating these actions." I presented the property records showing Victoria Winters' company purchasing homes from targeted residents at below-market rates. There appears to be a financial motive behind the harassment. The ADA nodded, his expression grave. "This elevates the situation considerably. We are potentially looking at real estate fraud as well. I would like to pursue this case personally." Over the next 2 weeks, events accelerated rapidly. Search warrants were executed at the homes of Victoria Winters and 2 board members, as well as the HOA office. Computers, phones, and documents were seized. Former homeowners contacted by investigators came forward with similar stories of harassment and pressure to sell. Most damning were the HOA's own records. Their internal communications revealed explicit targeting of specific homeowners, particularly new residents without established community connections who would be more vulnerable to pressure. Email exchanges between Victoria Winters and board members referred to these targets as acquisition opportunities, with discussions about which violations to manufacture for each property. Criminal charges were filed against Victoria Winters for fraud, conspiracy, harassment, and promoting or facilitating trespassing. 3 board members, including Richard Simmons, who had participated in the midnight break-in, were charged as co-conspirators. The security personnel faced separate charges for criminal trespassing and attempted breaking and entering. Local media coverage exploded. HOA gone rogue, criminal enterprise disguised as community governance, read one headline. Television news segments featured interviews with former residents describing their experiences of harassment. My phone rang constantly with requests for comments, which I declined on the advice of my attorney, who was now preparing a separate civil lawsuit against the HOA, its board members, and their insurance company. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Residents who had lived in fearful compliance for years suddenly found their voices. An emergency community meeting was called at the neighborhood clubhouse, with attendance so high that many people stood along the walls or outside by open windows. With Victoria Winters and the implicated board members conspicuously absent, the interim board chair, a retired judge who had frequently clashed with the previous leadership, invited me to address the gathering. Standing at the podium, facing neighbors who had been silent observers of my harassment, I felt surprisingly calm. What happened to me was not an isolated incident, I began, my voice steady. It was part of a systematic abuse of power that has affected many of you, either directly or through the culture of fear it created in our community. I proceeded to present a simplified version of the evidence, including security footage displayed on the clubhouse projector. The room fell silent as the video played, showing Victoria Winters placing the speaker near my property. Gasps were audible when I revealed property records showing how her company had acquired homes from previous targets. This was never about rule enforcement or property values, I concluded. It was about using the HOA as a weapon for personal financial gain at the expense of homeowners like us. But today marks the beginning of reclaiming our community. The silence that followed my presentation lasted only moments before erupting into applause. One by one, residents stood to share their own experiences of intimidation and harassment. Others expressed shame at having remained silent while their neighbors suffered. The meeting that had begun with tension and uncertainty transformed into something resembling a community healing session. As I returned to my seat, a woman I recognized as having once reported me for an unapproved mailbox decoration touched my arm gently. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes damp. "You did what many of us were too afraid to do." The HOA that had ruled through fear was crumbling, and from its ruins, something more authentic was beginning to emerge, a true community. The legal proceedings against Victoria Winters and her accomplices concluded not with the dramatic courtroom confrontation many had anticipated, but with a series of plea agreements. Facing overwhelming evidence and mounting legal costs, all defendants accepted deals that included probation, community service, and financial restitution. Victoria Winters additionally agreed to divest all properties acquired through her scheme and was permanently barred from serving on any homeowners association board. More meaningful than the legal penalties was the transformation that swept through Oak Ridge Estates in the aftermath. An interim board election brought fresh faces committed to transparency and reasonable governance. The first meeting of the new board opened with a public apology to all residents who had experienced harassment under the previous administration. The infamous 178-page rule book underwent comprehensive revision. A committee of residents, including myself, worked to reduce it to a reasonable 30 pages focused on necessary standards rather than micromanagement. The security force was disbanded entirely, replaced with a community watch program comprised of volunteer residents focused on actual safety rather than rule enforcement. My repaired front door, I chose to fix rather than replace it, keeping the reinforced frame as a reminder, became something of a community symbol. Neighbors who had previously avoided eye contact now stopped to chat when I collected my mail or worked in the yard. The culture of suspicion that had permeated Oak Ridge estates gradually gave way to genuine neighborliness. 3 months after the midnight break-in, I received an invitation to speak at a county-wide forum on HOA governance and homeowner rights. Standing before a packed auditorium of residents from various communities, I shared not just my experience of harassment, but the lessons learned about community oversight and the importance of engaged homeowners. The problems at Oak Ridge Estates did not develop overnight, I explained to the attentive audience. They grew gradually in the spaces created by homeowner apathy and fear. When we surrender our involvement in community governance out of convenience or intimidation, we create vacuums that allow corruption to flourish. My unexpected role as an advocate for HOA reform continued to expand. I began consulting with homeowners facing similar situations in other communities, helping them document harassment and understand their legal rights. What had begun as a personal defense against injustice evolved into a broader mission to prevent others from experiencing similar abuse. Perhaps most rewarding was witnessing the rebirth of community spirit within Oak Ridge Estates itself. The spring after the corruption was exposed, we held our first neighborhood block party, an event that would have been unthinkable under the previous regime. Children played freely in yards that had once been subject to arbitrary inspections. Neighbors shared food and stories without looking,